Many Latter-day Saints claim that the Trinity could not possibly be true because God is not a God of confusion. But here's the thing. The text that they get that from, 1 Corinthians 14, verse 32, is actually not about what many people think it is about. Let me just read the surrounding context for these verses. I'm going to read verse 26 through 32. It reads this: "What then, brothers? When you come together, each one has a hymn, a lesson, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. Let all things be done for building up. If any speak in a tongue, let there be only 2 or at most 3, and each in turn, and let someone interpret. But if there is no one to interpret, let each of them keep silent in church and speak to himself and to God. Let 2 or 3 prophets speak, and let the others weigh what is said. If a revelation is made to another sitting there, let the first be silent. For you can all prophesy one by one, so that all may learn and all may be encouraged. And the spirits of prophets are subject to prophets. For God is not a God of confusion, but of peace." What is Paul talking about in this text? Well, here he's talking about the necessity for orderly worship. Evidently, what was going on in the church in Corinth is that many people who were eager for manifestations of the Spirit were all standing up and speaking in tongues, and it was getting really confusing. People didn't really know who to listen to or what the tongues were saying and things like that. And so Paul admonishes this church. He says, listen, when you come together, when you gather for your church, let all things be done for building up. In other words, don't just do things because they're fun. Don't just do things because they're too cool. Do things because it edifies people. And so here's how these things can edify people. Verse 27, if someone speaks in a tongue, then let there be 2 or at most 3 people doing this during a church service, and let it be in order so that it's not all at once and people can understand what's going on. He ends this with kind of the explanation for why this is the case. For God is not a God of confusion, but of peace. In other words, God is not a God of disorder. He's not a God of confusion. He's a God of peace. And so it's very important to note that the context of this statement is talking specifically about how we order ourselves in church worship. So why couldn't 1 Corinthians 14 then apply to the nature of God? I mean, if God is not a God of confusion, how does that not apply to the Trinity, which is confusing for many people? Well, it's because the Bible tells us that there are things about God that we can't know. God is so much greater than us. This is one of the fundamental errors of the LDS Church and LDS thinking, that God is just like us, that he's just a man at another stage of development. But the Bible doesn't teach us this. It teaches that God is uncreated, that he never had a beginning, that he doesn't change. Numbers 23:19 says that God is not a man. He doesn't change his mind. He doesn't lie. He doesn't have the attributes that humanity has. And so when we consider God, what we're doing is taking a human framework and placing it on who God is. But he's not human. He's not like us. He's way greater than us. So consider these verses in Romans chapter 11, verses 33 through 35. It says this, Paul writes this: "Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments, how inscrutable his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor? Who has given him a gift who has given a gift to him that he might be repaid?" Verse 36 then says, "For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever. Amen." What Paul is saying is, who can search the judgments of God? Who can know his ways? No one has known the mind of the Lord. No one has been his counselor. No one has given a gift to him. Paul speaks here of the judgments and ways of God as being something beyond our grasp, beyond our understanding. Romans chapter 1 earlier says that what can be known about God has been made plain to people because God has revealed it. In other words, the reason we know anything about God is because God has revealed himself to us. So, is God a God of confusion? No, he's an orderly God. He's a God of logic. He created logic itself. But that does not mean that there are not things about God that we can't know. What God has chosen to reveal to us, we can know through his word, we can know in creation and things like that. But there are things of God that he has not seen fit to reveal to us. He has not decided to show us. And I think this is really important to note. And the reason this is the case is because God is not a man. God is not like us. He's totally different. He's a different being. And so does this verse about God not being a God of confusion really speak to the issue of the Trinity? I don't think so. I think that this verse is often misapplied to that conversation. The Trinity is a mystery in some sense. It is three truths, three propositions that are side by side. They don't contradict, but we can't harmonize them in a way that often is suitable to our mind's curiosities. But this doesn't mean it's false. All this means is that God is much, much greater and higher than we are. We have more in common with an ant than we have with God, even though we're created in the image of God, because of God's greatness and unsearchability and incomprehensibility.